behalf of me and everyone else who stands to learn something from this critique, thank you to those who were gutsy enough to submit some paintings. So as Jackson said, my name's Laurie Koss. I've been an artist for most of my life and a professional artist for 16 years. I studied both graphic arts and fine arts. And at UBC, I ultimately graduated from UBC with a Bachelor of Education, Art Education. One of my goals as a senior member of the Federation of Canadian Artists is to mentor, encourage, and support artists in their quest to improve and have success in the field of art. So today's critique will focus somewhat on technique, but mostly on composition. Jackson was right, that's kind of my thing. Because I think, you do have a lot of opportunity in the FCA to learn about technique, but not a lot to learn about composition. So an effective composition is imperative to a successful painting, as it will encourage the viewer's eye to move throughout the piece, returning again and again to an area of interest or emphasis or a point of focal point. An effective composition will cause the viewer to think or feel something. A wise teacher of mine once said that the artist only provides half of the interpretation of a painting and that the viewer provides the other half. If art doesn't stir up or create some interest, the viewer might simply say, well, that's nice, and then walk away and never take a second look. And we want people to take a second look at our paintings. So that's the goal, to make them interesting enough to have somebody stay with it for a little bit. So because of the subjective nature of responding to art, no two people will experience the same reaction to a piece of art or interpret it in the same way. However, there are basic objective guidelines to an art critique, and I will be using them to do my best to achieve a thoughtful, thorough critique of each of your paintings. So let's get started. And so I believe Kit's going to put the painting up on the screen. There we go. Now, can everybody see, can you guys still see me or just?
Yep.
You can still see me too. So what we have here, and I'm just going to see if I can make this a little bit bigger. Can you make it bigger on your screen, Kit, or is that as big as it will go?
This is pretty much the whole screen.
Okay. Oh, well, that's good enough. So what we have here is a bowl of apples. And
is Sharon still up, Jim? If she's watching this,
what's the part of me?
Sorry,
if everybody could please mute their microphones except for Laurie, or except if you'd like to ask a question. So I'm sure Laurie would be happy to field questions while she's doing this, but just so we don't have any background noise.
For sure. Okay, so bowl of apples. I think that the apples are rendered beautifully. The colors in them, the light, everything. That copper bowl is amazing. I mean, we know it's a copper bowl. I look at this painting and I see a lot of black. And especially if you look at a lot of the old masters, some of the Dutch still lifes, that kind of thing, you often get a lot of black in the background. So I understand the reason why someone might use black, but I would say to the artist to be careful of that. I'm also wondering about the apple on the left, if that's like part of a tree. I'm not really sure. But what I would say is that lighting is super important. And what I see is the lights coming sort of from left front, because you can tell by the shadow, especially that middle apple has a shadow on the right side. Kit's trying to show with her. That's Kit with the pointer. I think that's awesome. But the lighting has to be consistent. So that apple in the top left corner doesn't have that same shadow or any shadow. So I would just be very careful of making sure that your lighting is consistent. Also, if the light's coming from above, from the left and sort of in that direction, there should be some lighting on the table. And that front table in front of the pot doesn't have any lighting. So that's just a bit of inconsistency with the lighting. But overall, I mean, actually the other thing I'll say before I carry on is that line along the bottom, which suggests the edge of a table or something like that. If I could crop this, I would probably crop in a little bit tighter, cropping that out. I think it's just a distraction. If the top of the table were lit and it created the edge of the table, I think it would be more effective. But I mean, this painting has nice movement. The eye travels nicely in from the left, kind of curves around, goes through the apples. And I think that's effective. The only thing I would say as far as anytime we paint anything, we're trying to create depth, unless you're doing like a abstract or something non-representational painting, in which case it's often the opposite of that. You're trying to deny depth. In this case, this artist could create a little bit more depth by considering the size of the apples. The apple in the very front right, if that were a little bigger, and then the apple in the far back that's quite big, if that were a little smaller, the one to the right there, yeah. If that one were a bit smaller, you would be able to get into the painting a little bit more. It would just create more depth. And maybe even the one in the front there on the right had a little bit more intensity of color. And then the ones in the back, a little bit more subtle, duller colors. It would also create a little more depth. Kit, how are we doing for time? We've got about 3 minutes per painting.
I think unless there's any questions on this painting, we can move along.
That's what I would say to that one. I would just say, if you're going to do black in the background, I would just say try to vary it a little bit, not solid black. Just a thought, and especially watch the lighting. But overall, I think it's a great technique, and I especially want to commend that bowl, that copper bowl looks amazing. And so yeah, keep it up. It's good work. Yeah, we got a nice little landscape here, although I don't know what size the painting is, so it looks little on my screen. What I would say again with this, well, let's just look at movement first of all. We tend to, in North America, because we read from left to right, we tend to enter paintings from the left. Not always, but that's just sort of a general rule of thumb. So the entry is a little bit tough on this one, but it's sort of there. We come in, the horizon line is basically central of this landscape. So where the end of the lake is, I guess it's kind of cut down the middle, which is just one of those little things to be wary of, especially with landscapes. Sometimes it's better to think in rule of thirds. It tends to be more interesting. This is a nice piece. I mean, those mountains are beautiful. Got the rocks in the foreground. We've got trees in the midground, the lake in the midground, and then these very majestic mountains in the background. But once again, I would be careful about the lighting. It's a little ambiguous as to where the light's coming from. For me, I think probably left, because you see some shadows on the right on the mountains there. But the trees are really dark in that midground, and I just wonder if there's some light coming from the forest of trees. I just feel like to the right there, Kit. Yeah, I just almost wonder if there'd be that would be lit up a little bit more. It feels like it's in shadow. Looking at the rocks, they should be lit from the left as well. So kind of are. I guess I question, like, if you look at the trees in the foreground, if the light's coming from the left, you think the light would be more on the left of the trees too, and a little more shadow on the right. It's hard to tell. That's just something I'd watch. The other thing I'd watch, because we're always trying to create depth, as I mentioned before, got some really pretty violet colors in the mountains, but those violet colors are quite warm tones, and they tend to bring, warm tones come forward in a painting, and cool tones recede. So if you want to create more depth, what I would suggest with this one is bring some of those violet tones into the foreground. And also, speaking of that, the contrast in this painting is highest in those mountains. You've got most black and white. You need to bring contrast forward. Contrast will always come forward, and less contrast will always recede. So to create effective depth in a landscape, you really need to up the contrast in your foreground. So if those rocks had a lot of contrast and the mountains had less contrast, it would be a more effective landscape. The only other thing I'd say is just watch the color of the sky is usually reflected somewhat in the color of the lake. And I'm not sure here if it is that much. I don't know. I'd like to see some of those yellowy tones in the lake myself. But I mean, there's some definite skill happening here. There's like I said, those mountains are rendered beautifully. And I would just like to sum it up, more contrast and more warmer colors in the foreground, less contrast, duller colors, slightly duller colors in the background, and watch your light source. So otherwise, nice work. Keep it up. Love to see more. This is a lovely little painting, although like I said, it could be big. I don't know the size. Hollyhocks or foxglove, I'm guessing. I like the composition of this. You come in nicely from the left, following the path, following the mailboxes, following the fence, and you come right to the subject, which I would guess is the flowers. The colors are great. Once again, I would say that I would be careful of your lighting. The lighting definitely is coming from the top left in this case, judging by the shadows on the mailboxes and the shadows behind the flowers. Our perspective is we're looking down at this painting, I would think, because we can see the tops of the mailboxes. So that would suggest to me that we should be able to see the top of the fence as well. And see how you can't see the top of the fence? I would think this needs a little edge along there, and it should be lit. See how well lit the tops of the mailboxes are? That same thing should be repeated on the fence. Otherwise, what else would I say? I don't know if this is a proper crop. That the top of that one, Kit, where you are, just go right to the top. That little spot right there, if that is how the painting is, I would be wary of that kind of thing. That's called a tangent. The relationship of the image, which is the flower, the top of the flower, to the picture plane, which is the edge of the canvas. It creates a little bit of tension when you have something that close but not touching. So I'd either have the flower going right off the page or have it down so there's a comfortable space for the eye to move around. It's just a little thing to watch. The only other thing I'd say is, once again, we're trying to create depth. I'd love to see in the flowers that are the closest to us, which would be maybe that one, just a little more detail, a little more contrast to pop them up so that it just creates a little more depth in the painting. But I think it's great image. I wouldn't say a lot more. I think it's lovely. I would just, sharpen up some of the things you want closer and a little more contrast in the closer items. But otherwise, yeah, nice piece. This is an interesting painting. Looks like a gentleman playing, that is a sitar, I believe. Does it have a name, this painting? Or? No, okay, it's it's Delora's painting. Is that a sitar? I think it is. Can she hear me?
Yes, it is a sitar.
Sitar.
And there's a little bit of a story behind this, and it's just that this young man passed away in February, and his family wanted a painting of him playing his sitar, and they only had a video of him. And so I captured a screenshot from the video, but the video didn't show the whole sitar and didn't show his hands. And I'm afraid I'm not a good enough artist to be able to imagine what everything would look like beyond. So I realize it's cutting him off a little bit, but I'll let you do the critique. I just thought I'd like to explain.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's got good movement. I mean, you come in from the left, you go straight up, and because of the crop, you do tend to shoot right out of the painting on the right side, which I think if you'd seen the hand, you're probably right. We would have come back down the hand and around and back into the painting. So that's probably, from the compositional point of view, the only thing I would sort of watch. But, it's a nice tribute to someone who passed away. The only thing I would say is, see that little knob right where your thing is, the really bright one, that one would be probably closest to us, because I think it looks to me like the arm of the neck of the sitar is sort of at an angle toward us a little bit. That one is see the contrast in that and the detail, and then the one to the right is less detailed and less contrasty. I would just watch that. The ones that are in the foreground, you want them to be more contrasted, more detailed, like that one is, and then they could kind of fade off as they go down the neck of the sitar. But I think if I were to say anything else, it would be the knee is foreshortened, and you want that coming forward a little bit more, maybe a little bit bigger in relationship to his size. It's just it's a little bit of an awkward foreshortening, I think. It probably, if you were to look at the photo again, Delora, I think that knee might, and that leg might be a little bit bigger as far as proportion goes. But the only other thing I would say, because the movement's good, I mean, your eye does move around fairly well despite being shot off out of there with the neck. It kind of comes back down along his arm there somewhat and goes up to his face, which is pretty good movement. I would really sharpen up, a little darker in his nostrils, a little sharper around his glasses. Those kind of glasses always usually have a bright spot of light somewhere. The light is pretty much from the front, from the right. Is it right from the right? It's from the front, which tends to be the hardest to get a successful painting from. Really tough to paint something and have it work well if it's lit from the front. But I think you did a pretty good job. I mean, I quite like it. It's got a nice feeling to it, and certainly a nice tribute to someone who obviously passed away too soon. So I hope that helps. We'll go to the next one. It's a lovely little still life. Some lemons. I mean, those are very clearly lemons, and the texture on that one on the left, the highlight on the one on the left there in the front. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a little ambiguous to me what's happening in the bottom right below that. That's some sort of leaves, I guess, of the lemon just in shadow. So looking at this piece, you come in from the left pretty nicely along that leaf. Your eye does travel along around the 3 lemons quite nicely, but it does shoot up there, right there where you were, so I can shoot up through that a little bit. Not sure how I feel about that. I'd also find the lemons are almost dead center, not quite. If I could crop, I would probably crop this in a bit tighter. Just think that you've done a nice job of the red in the background, but I feel like there's a lot of wasted space, I guess. But the interest and the beauty in this piece is really those lovely lemons and how they're lit. So I don't have the ability to do that, but if I could, I would crop it in tighter. And are you going to do it? Kit's going to crop for us. Yes. I would just come in tighter, like, yeah, right down, and maybe slide that over a bit if you can. Yeah, there, I'd stop right there for now. That's not a bad example of how cropping can work. I don't know how the rest of you feel about that. I know you're all muted, but I just think that then we can really concentrate on the subject, which are those lemons, and they are beautifully rendered. So that's all I got to say about that.
There we go.
Oh yeah, a little painting of this young girl. I would guess she's around 10 or so, just by guessing by her. She looks about a 10-year-old feeding a duck. Children are tricky to paint, and proportions in people can be tricky, especially children.
It's too small.
Yeah, can you please mute that, whoever's talking there?
Yeah, just a sec.
I don't think it's probably good to have comments from other people, but
Yeah.
anyhow, so the eye, I was going to get to the proportions in a second. The eye comes nicely in from the left, right along the duck, straight up her arm to that lovely face, curves down her back, comes around again, takes in the duck again, goes back up, takes in the rocks, which lead right back to the subject. So it's beautiful movement in this painting. I think it's quite effective. I think you could also crop in a little tighter on the back. Like I would probably crop the back of her right off. I just don't think it's necessary, maybe because that space behind her is probably not necessary, but that's not a big deal. It's just a little suggestion. As far as proportions, children are tricky to paint. The adults, as a general rule, the eyes are generally right in the middle of your face, right? With children, there's just a little more forehead, especially when they're really young, and that starts to change as they get older. I think that the forehead of this girl probably could be expanded a little bit more, like just right around there. Yeah, it feels a little bit short to me. And I think it could be filled in a bit. Whoever painted this, I would look at your reference again and just double check that. I would also say with the eyes, the edge of the face, the nostrils, a little dark, some more dark, even though she's blonde, there still would be some dark, yeah, right at the nostril. There'd be a little darker bits around the eye, maybe the lip, the upper lips. By the way, upper lips are generally darker than lower lips. That's just something to watch for. And then the contour around her face, that could even be darkened a bit just to let her face stand out more, because ultimately her face is this subject. I think you're coming up from the duck, straight up that arm, right to that lovely face. Yeah, so the hand is probably too small. Like if we don't realize how big our hands are, look at me, our hands are quite large. Children have actually pretty large hands, almost as large. About a girl who's about 10 years old almost has hands the size of an adult. So that hand looks small in proportion to her body. So I would watch that. It's so lovely. The dress is lovely. The foot's probably could be right. It might be a little small too. It's hard to tell. But I would say one other thing. The duck, I would have either done one or two things with the duck. Lighten the area around the duck's head so the head stands out more, or sort of like the background behind the duck lighter so the dark head stands out, or lighten the duck's head against the background somehow to make some contrast there, just so the duck stands out a little bit more. It's just a bit tough to see. Even if that's how your photograph is, as an artist, you have artistic license and you can make some contrast with between the background and the subject to let it stand out. So I think that could be fixed. Otherwise, I mean, it's a lovely little piece. So hope that helps. This is a very beautiful piece. That looks to me like, is the artist here? Is that a fresco piece? Do you know if the artist is listening?
I can't check the list of participants at the same time I'm sharing my screen, unfortunately, so I can't tell you.
If you are,
there he is.
oh, hello there. Is that a fresco painting?
No, actually it's an airbrush.
An airbrush, but what are the little bits then on the canvas?
That's an old painting I painted over that I used to use like sand and stuff that I mixed with gesso.
Oh, okay. It almost looked like a fresco for some reason to me, but I mean,
yeah, I
anyway.
liked the texture about it. That's one of the things I liked about it.
Yeah, I do too. Okay, well, thank you. It's a beautiful piece. Your eye comes in lovely. Your eye comes nicely in along, especially the shadow right there. Yeah, and right down from the bowl, curves up and right down those lemons and curves right all the way around again. The colors are great. I love the yellow and the blue. The lemons look like lemons, and those are definitely lemons. And that blue bowl is definitely a glass bowl. I mean, the tones in it. So just to be, is the piece itself airbrushed? All of it airbrushed? The whole, all the lemon, everything?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. And is it done with acrylic or?
It's done with acrylic, so they're golden high flow.
Oh, wow.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I think this is a great piece. The only thing I would say, I mean, this is only like, it's a 9.5 out of 10. And if you want to take it to a 10 out of 10, because it is really lovely. I think the reflective shadow is beautiful too. I would say that you're a little tight on the left side there. That bowl against the edge of the picture plane just creates a bit of tension. Sometimes artists do that intentionally to create tension. So maybe that was your intention, but I personally would love to see with the space on the right side of by the lemons, and just kind of have a little more space on the left. It feels a little tight. You know, some people might crop it a little more off the bottom, but I don't know. I think I'd probably leave it just as it is. And I don't know if you have your signature status with the FCA, but if you don't, you might want to consider trying for it. It's a good piece. Really
okay.
Good. Oh. Wow. Okay. This is a really interesting piece. When I look at this, initially it looks quite abstract. Of course, when you take another look, you realize what you're looking at, which is a car window or some kind of window and the wet, and there's cars and possibly a house. maybe some rocks on the left side there, all seen through water. You know, I think I've always dreamt of painting this kind of scene. I've you know, looking through water on a window and imagining if you could make it into a painting. I commend the person who tried this. This is quite a cool piece. Yeah, the movement's great. I mean, you come in from the left really nicely. Yep, right into there. The focal point's probably right where you are there to the right. They're right around there somewhere because your eye keeps going back to that, but it moves around and out and back in. And wow, that's, I mean, it's really a phenomenal piece. It's just great movement. Very, very beautifully done. I don't really have much to say. I think it's just super cool, and I'm jealous because I would like to. Yeah, no, I think it's just super interesting, and something. It's a scene that we all recognize, but rarely have seen it done in a painting. And I think, I mean, if I want to be super picky, maybe a little bit more contrast on that the left red car, the back of that car, just because it's the closest thing to us. Maybe around where the light is, even just a little more black, dark and light there, but that's super picky. I don't really have much else to say. I think it's a very cool piece. Well, here's a lovely little landscape. Let me see. I love the horizontal lines. That's a type of armature. I can't remember what it's called, but yeah, I think those are great. I mean, I like that it's kind of around the 1/3 mark. It's not cut right in the center. The blue of the blue shadows on the snow work really well, and the contrasting orangey colors. Yeah, it's great. So movement's good. The one thing I would say is that really dark line of trees along the horizon line, it looks like. That does flatten out the composition just a little bit because darker colors come forward, lighter colors recede. So your colors in the front should be at least as dark as that, and probably darker if you want to create more depth. So I would think that those, yeah, that right along there, Kit, that should be a little bit lighter. Just to, if you want to create more depth, which I think it's pretty good depth in this, but I think that flattens it out a little bit. I would also say, to me, this painting feels like it's divided in half, and that top half is of the sky. It doesn't feel like it's been given as much attention as the bottom half. And the bottom half is a very skilled painting with wonderful color. The top half feels like, maybe, I may be wrong, that the sky, I don't know if you mix the colors to create that blue. A lot of people use a very turquoisey tone in the sky, and if you really look at the sky, it's generally more of a violet tinge to it, not a turquoise. And you definitely see the reflected light on the snow is more of that violet. So I would love to see a different tone in the sky personally, that more of that violet. I think it would be more realistic to the piece. But other than that, I think it's cool that the shadows on the snow look really, really great. Cool. Love that in the front. It's an unusual foreground, but it works. And just like to see a little more of the dark in the front, light in the back. And I'd love to see that sky, the color, the tones of it match more to what the painting is, so they don't look like two separate paintings. So otherwise, beautifully done. Yeah. A painting of an owl. I like that the owl's flying. It's flying from the left, or sorry, the right to the left, with space in front of it to fly into, which is a compositional rule. Okay, so to create, anytime you're doing an animal, oh, let me, before I say that, so that you do kind of move into the painting, you circle around the face of the owl, you come down that wing on the right, and they kind of go around again. Anytime let's just look at the owl for a second. This is, these are tricky paintings when you have an isolated animal or subject with basically a background sort of floating. They can be very tricky. First of all, let's just to look at the owl. We want to create depth again, no matter what you're painting. And that right wing, to me, would be the closest thing, the most in the foreground. That wing to create more depth should be the most detailed, the most contrast, the most intense colors. That's how you're going to create depth. So that would, and then from there you move to the eye. Always the eye of any animal person should be quite clear and have a little sparkle in it. That little sparkle will make a difference. I think it's missing that. What I would say about this one is I would love if you could crop it in a little tighter kit, like you almost crop off the back of the right wing just slightly. A little bit more space on the left, just a little more on the left, not quite that much, not that much. Yeah, something like that. I think that is a bit more of, maybe even take a little teeny bit more off the top, but just, I want to see just for a second. Not that much. Yeah, something like that. I think that would be more effective because all that background, like our backgrounds need to be given as much attention as our foregrounds. And the person's given a lot of attention to this background with the colors and that, but unfortunately it's become a bit of a distraction to the owl. So cutting some of it out and coming a little closer makes us really focus on the subject matter, which is the owl. I would also say that you've got a lot of intense colors in the background, which does flatten the piece out. So if the painting is about the owl, and I suspect it is, and it should be, then you watch that the background doesn't distract. And in this case, I think it does, especially in the bigger format. I think the background is quite distracting. So I would make the background colors smoother, softer, more grayed down, not as intense, and let that owl really pop. And then work on really getting some darks and lights in that owl, in the owl itself, and refining it so that wing in the front is really sharp, the face is sharp. And then I think it would be more effective if you were to do that and consider the crop. But I think it has potential. I think it's, owls are beautiful creatures. And I think I would see this one as needing just a little bit more work to make it a great painting. Hope that helps. Okay, so we've got a picture of a woman wearing a hat. Kind of come in from the left, check out her face, go down the ponytail, out, up the arm, around. Pretty good movement. I mean, very central subjects can be challenging to make interesting. The light's coming from the left. You can see her face is quite lit on the left, and there's a bit of shadow on the right. Well, there's shadow on the right of her nose, right of the hat. There's shadow right of her face. The scarf is not shadowed on the right. That's something that should be, because lighting has to be consistent. And if the light's coming from the left, that scarf would be more in shadow. Same with the right side of her torso and the right side of her arm. So I think, could you crop it so that just the top of the hat is cropped off? I don't think you need all that space above it. It's just wasted space there, something like that. And then I'm also wondering if you crop it in a little bit off the right, just bring it in a bit, just to make it so it's not so, no, that doesn't look good. Never mind, go back. I'm not really sure. I think at least I would crop it. See, you don't need the space around the top, like right there looks better, yeah. You don't need all that space above the hat, it's pointless. So this creates a little bit better movement. I would definitely watch, once again, the nostrils are really dark. I mean, look at mine. Can you see, look at anyone else? And the upper lips generally darker. Can you see that on me? And so those are lines people often don't put enough shadow in. So I would darken those areas up. I would also, like I mentioned, watch the lighting. And those, the buttons are pretty close to the front of the image. I would sharpen those buttons up too, just to try to create some depth with it. It's a bit tough to create depth when you're lit. It's almost like her torso appears to be lit from the front, but we know it's actually lit from the left. So I would work on the shadows to create a little bit more 3-dimension. But I do prefer it cropped like that. So hope that helps.
Oh, that's tiny. Hang on, let's see if I can.
There we go.
This
You
is
got
a
it.
very low resolution image, which is one thing to think about when you're sending images for critique. The more resolution, the better.
Yeah, and this one's a little tough to see because it is a bit blurry, but
It
I'll
is,
give it a go. It looks like a rock with some kind of lichen or something on it. Certainly beautifully rendered. I mean, you come in nicely from the left. There's lots of entry points, and those ones along the bottom, those twigs wrap up and around, and you come back up to the rock, and then so there's lots of movement in this painting. I'm not really sure what the subject matter is. If it's like the point of interest. I know what the subject is. The point of interest, it tends to be that rock right there, but I don't think that's where the artist intended. I think it's probably the big one, I would guess. So I would think it also feels a little bit to me like that rock is floating a little bit. Look at the bottom edge there. Something about that extra light on that bottom edge that's making it feel like it's floating. I don't know if that's water. Does it look like it's in water to you, Kit? I don't know.
I don't see water there.
Just not sure about that extra light along the bottom edge. I think I think I can't really do this one fair. It's not fair game, sorry, because it's a little blurry. But I would say if I would just increase the contrast in this big rock, and I guess that would be the subject matter. Maybe a little bit more intensity in some of the colors to bring that rock forward. I think this one could be more interesting cropped a little bit.
The background is very, very interesting, but this rock is so huge, it's hard for it to be a center of interest. Just
I know.
So big.
Can you crop it in from the bottom? Let's just take the bottom right off just for a second. I want to see if it makes it more interesting. Just crop right up, down a little bit more. And then down a little bit more, down
At the down at the bottom or down from the top?
Give us a little more of the bottom, just a little more of the stop, and then come in from the left a little bit. Just want to see if that helps at all. No, I need the top still. Yes, so not quite that much. Sorry, guys. There's something like that. I personally find that a little more interesting because the rock feels more anchored in the scene. I don't know if how the rest of you feel about that, but I do prefer that. That's just it's just a balance thing, a harmonious thing. I think it's an interesting painting. I like all the twigs and weeds and everything, and I think the rock feels a little more anchored, and it doesn't feel like it's floating to me when it's like that. So that's what I would do. Otherwise, I think it's kind of a cool piece. It's interesting, something different.
And this one is also tiny.
It is a tiny one.
There we go.
Yeah, this painting definitely come in nicely from the left. I like the horizon line the horizon line is quite low in this one, which makes it interesting. The figures it's a triangular composition, which is very effective and works really well in this case. Come in along that shadow line and up the arm and over the top of the blonde head, down the brunette, down the side, her jeans, her belt, the shadows. It's all very beautifully done. It's interesting. It's interesting because I see the clouds are in the shape of the continents, and then we've got two highlighted pieces, and it looks like a line connecting them with a heart. So that's interesting. It is interesting. But what it does is that makes the painting more of an illustration than a piece of fine art. And to try to describe the difference, it's very illustrative because it's as though it's telling a story, and the story is there for us to see. These people probably met, one's from, is that Russia, and one's from North America, and they're in love. So that's what an illustration does. An illustration tells a story. Some illustrations can be beautiful, and this is a good example of that. It is a beautiful illustration, but it's not, I wouldn't consider it fine art because the clouds are creating the continents, and that you've got that heart there, very symbolic. I'll try to explain what I mean by this. An illustration basically illustrates a story in some way. And this does a great job of that. And it's, like I said, as far as technique, it's beautiful. But I'm looking at the composition right now and the elements and that. So it illustrates a story. That's what an illustration is. And all the answers are given to the viewer in an illustration. So we've got all the answers there. We know now that one of them's from, Europe or wherever, and then the other one's from North America, and that they're in love. Whereas fine art usually allows the viewer to interpret it themselves. So it leaves a room for interpretation. Like I mentioned before, a mentor of mine said that the artist puts in part of the interpretation and the viewer puts in the rest. So if those are just normal clouds in the background, that would elevate it to more of a fine art piece, so that the viewer then looks at this couple and sees them looking out at the clouds and puts their own story into it. The story is right there for us now, and that's what makes it more illustrative. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, illustrations, there's some illustrations that are higher quality than some pieces of fine art. It's just that it's very illustrative. And if you want to work toward more of a fine art portfolio and career, you might want to watch that. But a beautiful piece, really beautiful. A beautiful illustration is what I would say. So hope that helps. Oh, and actually stay on this one for a sec. I would also say watch when you're painting the sky. As a general rule, the sky is grayer, more toned down, more dull toward the horizon line, and more intense as you go up. Just a rule of thumb, just next time you take some photos of the sky and the horizon line, you'll notice it. So we tend to have our duller, grayer colors toward the horizon line and our more intense colors as you go up. So otherwise, a great piece. A nice, long, tall, narrow landscape with the path coming in from the right, which is a little, most of the time like I said, our eye likes to come in from the left, but I mean, it works. Yeah, you definitely, it's an S curve armature, a backwards S. So we come in from the right in this case. We go along the path and we travel up, and those little trees point us right up to that beautiful rock. We go up, and then we come down the big tree, right? And then we come along, look at the rocks, and then the creek at the bottom. And so there's really good movement in this piece. I like that the horizon, the top of the grass there is about a third, not halfway through. So it makes it a little more interesting. Solitary tree in the midground works really well. Creek in the foreground, cool rock in the background. What I would say with this one is that once again, you've got some really cool violet colors in that rock in the background. And because those are quite intense violet, I mean, I love it. I think it looks great, but the intensity of it does bring it forward. So it does flatten the piece out a little bit. The way to counteract that would be to have some of that same violet or more intense colors in the foreground, kind of where the creek is. So if any of those rocks had some of even more intense of a violet, and then you grade down or dull down the violet in the rocks, it would just create a little bit more depth. But that's being pretty picky. It's a nicely rendered piece. I would also once again watch the sky. That's quite a turquoisey sky, and you've got working with some cool violet colors. I would personally look toward thinking about less turquoisey, mixing your tones in your sky and getting some of that violet in there. The lighting's good. I mean, the lighting looks like it's coming from the right, the way that the tree trunk's lit. So the tree, and all those trees in the background too, but the tree in the foreground, I'm just wondering why there's not more light on some of the right side of that. I think a little bit more, there should be a little bit more light in some patches in there, just being picky. It's a beautiful piece. Just maybe, I don't know, I still feel like I want some of the bigger, more contrasty solid rocks in the foreground just to anchor it. But otherwise, I mean, yeah, it's a lovely piece. I like the light in the middle. It's shining on the grass. It's great. Well done. Interesting landscape where you don't see the sky, but you see it only in the reflection, which is an interesting composition. They come in nicely from the left. And it does tend to want to go out the right, but there are spots to come back in. So there's some nice movement in this piece. I'm not sure what I would call the area of emphasis or point of interest. I don't know if there really is one. Like right where go up right there, right in that area there. If that were highlighted a little bit more, a little extra light, it might be a little more emphasized. I think it would move our eye a little bit more effectively around the piece, just because you need something to go to. The eye needs something to go to in this case. There are some rules of reflection. Because the water does absorb some light, so generally the reflection is a little duller, a little bit lighter than the land. So it's something to keep in mind. And there's generally some kind of line dividing, because most trees don't go right to the water. So see to the right there, Kit, there's a little strip of light, just like there, yeah. Generally in most landscapes with really clear reflections, there would be a little bit of light or something lighter to really show that that division between the land and the lake. The artist has dulled down, so certainly less. There's less detail in the reflection, which is great. But the colors would be just a little softer, a little duller. And the sky, once again, the sky would be a little, I think would be a little bit, I mean, we obviously can't see the sky, but I think I would still watch that. The sky tones would be from the top of the trees to the bottom of the canvas should go from light to dark a little bit, just the nature of how the sky is, because it's the opposite. I don't know if that makes sense. It's kind of a cool piece. I mean, it's kind of cut, the horizon line's kind of cut dead center, which is a bit awkward as far as interest, but I think it's an interesting piece. I mean, there's some atmospheric perspective happening as if you look into those in the background there, those are more blue, which brings them into the background. Yeah, I think it's kind of an interesting piece. I would just watch that sky tone just a little bit and how the color of the sky changes from it as it goes up into the atmosphere. So, and I would also watch that division between the land and the water, and also that the colors will be slightly less intense and slightly less dark in the water. It's subtle, but it would be enough to just tweak this a little bit. But otherwise, that's a cool piece. Got another landscape, a big mountain on the left. This is a pastel, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Come in nicely from the left. That's a beautifully rendered mountain right there, yeah. And then we kind of curve down. Actually, it kind of creates a movement, Z. If you come in from the left, Kit, and then go up that, it's just like a Z. It zigzags to the up and then to the left and then back again. So it's like a Z or an S curve armature to those mountains in the back. I mean, the atmospheric perspective is great because you've got the grade mountains. Most of the most intense colors are in the midground, which can flatten an image out a bit. So I would, if you're going to do that, and if that's how you want to render it, it's cool. I think the color combinations are cool. I would get some of those intense colors in the foreground, even though the foreground, especially on the right-hand side, is in shadow. You can still get some hints of intensity in there, which I think would bring it forward more. Yeah, I think that would be an important thing to do, because it does flatten it out a little bit, having all that intensity in the midground. Although on the left side you've got some nice intense colors, but you want to create that atmospheric perspective a little bit more. So I even wonder if that midground should be slightly more blued down, but grayed down. But it's an interesting piece. I'm not sure about the sky. So that's the paper showing through, I'm guessing, with the white. I think the paper showing through, if that's a rust colored paper, I'm just guessing here. I feel like that's a bit of a distraction, almost like there's a dust storm going on or something in the sky. And I think if you worked that a little bit more and made some more dramatic clouds and a little less of the paper, that rust paper showing through, I think it would be more effective. But otherwise it's cool. Yeah, it's a cool piece. It's just, I'm not really sure if there's a focal point. Do you see one, Kit?
Well, my eye keeps coming back to this
Yeah,
because of the bright colors, but that's sort of smack dab in the middle. So I doubt
Yeah.
that was the intention.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it's a neat, I think it's a, there's some great technique happening here. I think the composition works somewhat, but I would like to see a little bit more of a illusion of depth, and it's not showing that as much as I think it could if some of those intense colors were brought forward. Hope that helps. Another landscape, another beautiful mountain range. Some big boulders in the foreground, some trees in the midground, and these beautiful mountains. Beautiful atmospheric perspective here with the blued down, grayed down mountains in the foreground, or the background, pardon me. Warm tones in the foreground. So that does create some nice depth from that perspective. I do see the tangent, the edge of the top of the mountain there in relation to the edge of the picture plane. It just creates a little bit of tension. I would like to see a little more space there. I'm not sure if the crop of this image has cropped out space that's actually there and we're missing it, but I would watch that. So either bring it away or cut it right off the page. I wouldn't leave it like that. The light is, where's it coming from? From the right? There's some shadows on the left of some of the rocks. The lighting's a little bit ambiguous. I would watch your lighting because the trees are also kind of not showing much light on either side. It looks to me like light's kind of coming from the right, I think.
Yeah.
But it is a bit ambiguous, so I'd watch that. I'd also, the boulders in the front are really important to establish your foreground. And especially right there where your arrow is, there's an outline of that boulder. And just be careful of that, of the outline. Yeah, you don't need the outline there. It flattens the image right out. So just be careful of outlining. I like to see more contrast in the foreground, because contrast always comes forward, less contrast goes back. If you got some real contrast and shadows and whites and darks in those foreground boulders, I think this could be quite a lovely piece. And I would just watch the shadows. I think the mountains are done beautifully, but because they're in the background and they do recede pretty nicely, but I think you need to establish the foreground and the depth by getting some more contrast and detail in those foreground boulders, and watch the lighting on the trees too. That's all I have to say about that one, but I think it's got some potential for sure. Pet portraits. Since I'm a total dog lover, can't help but be attracted to that cute face. Pet portraits can be tough. The most important parts of a pet portrait, especially a dog portrait, I would say, are the eyes and the nose. And the nose is the part of a pet that's most in the foreground. So in this case, that nose doesn't look as sharp and as detailed as it could be. I think it could some more highlights. Dogs' noses are almost always wet, right? They got that. There's a little bit there, but not as much as it could pop. It could pop even more. Same with the eyes. I think the eyes are quite dark. There's a little light in there, but they feel really dark to me. So I would watch that. I would also say that it's so tempting with pet portraits to paint with a thin brush, but I think you would probably, if you were to squint at your subject and try to get away from the individual hair. I know you're not doing the individual hairs, but there's a lot. I mean, the colors look great. I just think that a thicker brush with a pet portrait would give you more chunks of color and tone as opposed to those individual lines. So that's something I would watch. And I like that he's positioned off center. That I think that works, but the background color is a bit of a distraction for me. The color it's quite an intense turquoise. Well, it's not that intense, but it is more intense than the tones of the dog. And so it does flatten it out once again. I'd almost like to see a duller tone in the background. I don't think you need to worry about it being a dull painting overall, because there's some beautiful tones in the dog fur, a little hint of pink in the collar. And also a flat background is always tough. So I would, whatever tone of background you choose with an animal portrait, try to have some dark on one side and some light on the other side, just to kind of direct our eye around the piece a little bit. Just be careful of having the same tone all the way across, but make those eyes sparkle a little bit more, make the nose sparkle a little bit more. A thicker brush, I think, would really add to this piece, because there's some beautiful tones in the fur. Hope that helps. Cute puppy.
Oh my God.
This painting is incredible. It's one of those opportunities where the artist has given the viewer a chance to look at something ordinary, something that we don't normally take the time to really look at and appreciate. So I'm assuming this is a box or a bin of yarn, different colors, colored yarn. It's beautifully painted and rendered. I mean, great skill from the artist, for a lot of patience too. The eye comes in nicely from the left, and then just has so much fun going all the way around and through and then back in and around. And for me, one of the reasons why this works is right where you are, that turquoise there, that would be what I would call the center, the emphasis is there's a little more intensity there. The eye wants to keep returning to that spot. That's in about a third of the canvas, which is really effective to make the eye want to keep moving. So yeah, really great movement in this one. And I mean, I love it.
If I could interject, if there's one word that I could use to describe this painting, it would be luscious.
It is really luscious. If the artist doesn't yet have his or her signature status, I think that's in your future if you keep working. This is it's an exceptional painting, and I really don't have anything negative to say at all. I mean, I think the lighting's great. It's actually pretty overhead lighting, but it works because there's some deep shadows around the balls, and then some lighter secondary shadows too, like on that purple one. On the, yeah, so it is really a very stunning piece. I like how the artist is softened. Like if you look at the top right, the details less on the edges. They're the top right, and then the bottom left. They're just like hints of the yarn. You don't. She or he hasn't put in every single bit of every strand and every piece of wool in some of those outside areas. Yeah, it's a beautiful piece. I mean, I think it's stunning. How big is this? I don't see the size, but yeah, that's Yolanda. Well done, Yolanda. Beautiful. That's just beautiful. Yeah, and I love it when an artist gives you a chance to look at something we wouldn't normally appreciate and take time to look at. And in this case, she's made a box or a bag of yarn stunning. So yeah, well done.
And I think that brings us, yep, that brings us to the end of our paintings. So I'll just stop sharing and we can go back in here.
And I'm happy to take any questions or comments. And I hope I didn't talk too fast. I have a tendency to talk quite quickly. So I hope you heard me okay.
And just one reminder that within a couple of days, I'll be sending out an email link that we've recorded Laurie's portion of this, so it'll be available on our YouTube channel. Surprise, surprise, we have a YouTube channel.
I would love to hear any feedback. You know, if we continue to do critiques, I'm happy to do them, but if I would love to know if even the artists that aren't present, I'm sorry, even artists that are present that didn't have a painting in, if you found something constructive in that for yourself. And also artists that did have a painting in, if you have any comments too, or questions. I'll take questions as well.
Well, I was just going to say, Laurie, like, yeah, I didn't have a painting there, but I found this incredibly useful. Just the, like the cropping alone, just amazing insight there with how that can just totally change and make a painting. Like it's amazing, insightful stuff. So thank you for inspiring and sharing that.
Thanks,
expertise.
Captain. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, Laurie, it's
Your hand up.
Janice.
Janice. Hi, Janice.
Hi, I want to thank you. I've learned from every painting that you critiqued, especially mine, and I'm going to I hope I can make changes over varnish.
Which one was yours, Janice?
Oil, it's the blue landscape, the winter landscape.
Oh yeah, that one's worth it. You can. There are ways to. There are ways to remove varnish. Someone else might speak to that. I've never had to do it myself yet.
Yeah.
But I do think that painting, you can take it you can just take it to that next level by a little more time spent on that sky. And
I think I might be able to paint oil over varnish.
Don't do that.
No.
Because down the road, if they have to do any restoration on your painting, the top layer will come off. But it's really not that hard to remove the varnish. I have done it when I've had a damaged painting. I've had to remove the varnish, repair the painting, and then revarnish it. So to me, that would be worth it to do that.
And you only have to remove it from the top part of the painting,
Yes.
not the whole thing to it. I think it's worth it. That painting's, I think with that a little more attention to the sky and the tone of the sky, I think you're gonna have
The sky drove me crazy. Thank you, Laurie.
You're welcome. You're welcome. If anyone wants to, maybe put your hand up so we know and who. There you go. Is that Ava?
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Laurie. All your feedback was very helpful to me. Everything that you commented on, I was frantically trying to take notes. Unsuccessfully, I gave up, but this is too much to take in, but it was all very helpful. Thank you. I'm sure it took a lot of energy to do that.
I'm a little tired now, but it was fun.
I
I do love looking at art. Thank you, Ava.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any comments or questions?
I'd just like to thank you as well, Laurie. That was awesome. I really appreciated it.
You're welcome. Delora, which painting was yours? Do you mind?
It was the fellow with the sitar and the hollyhocks with the mailbox.
Oh,
But
yeah.
that was great. Thank you.
There's some little tidbits in there for you, hopefully. Yeah, great. Good work.
Yes.
Excellent work. Anyone else?
Good. Well, I think we'll probably wrap this session up. Like I say, I'll send out an email in a couple of days with a link to the recording. So if you were unable to take notes all the way through, you'll be able to go back and listen to different parts of it, which will be very helpful. I know that I found this incredibly helpful, and I'm looking forward actually to seeing it again while I'm doing the video editing.